The military-grade Humvee careened down the cracked, debris-strewn highway, its tires barely clinging to the treacherous road. Inside, a small group of survivors clung to their seats, faces etched with terror as they hurtled towards their last hope of salvation. Amelia, a young woman whose once vibrant spirit had been tempered by the horrors she'd witnessed, gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white. "We've got to make it," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine and the shattering of glass as the vehicle smashed through a barricade of abandoned cars. In the driver's seat, a battle-hardened ex-soldier named Garrett navigated the treacherous path, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "The safe haven is just ahead," he growled, his words clipped and urgent. "We can't stop now, no matter what." A deafening explosion rocked the Humvee, and Amelia felt her heart leap into her throat as she caught a glimpse of the horde of twisted, mutated creatures that pursued them. Their inhuman shrieks sent chills down her spine, and she knew that they were the most terrifying adversaries she had ever faced. The vehicle lurched sideways as Garrett fought to maintain control, and Amelia caught a brief glimpse of the safe haven. A fortified compound that had once been a military base, now their last hope of survival. But as they drew closer, a horrifying sight unfolded before their eyes. The gates were breached, and the compound was overrun with the same monstrosities that had been chasing them. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she realized that their final refuge had been compromised, leaving them with nowhere left to turn. Garrett's face was a mask of grim determination as he navigated the Humvee through the chaos, weaving between the shambling forms of the infected. Amelia could see the fear in his eyes, but he refused to give in, his jaw set in a resolute line. As they drew closer to the compound, the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. The once impregnable walls had been breached, and the infected had flooded in, their numbers swelling with each passing moment. Amelia could see the bodies of those who had failed to make it, their fate a gruesome testament to the relentless onslaught of the undead horde. Garrett's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "We're going to have to fight our way in," he said, his voice low and grim. "There's no other way." Amelia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that the battle ahead would be fierce, that they would be facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. But she also knew that they had no choice. It was a fight for their lives, a desperate last stand against the unimaginable. As the Humvee careened towards the breach in the compound's walls, Amelia steeled herself, her hands gripping the door handle in anticipation. The roar of the infected grew deafening, and she could see their twisted, mutated forms surging towards them, their hunger insatiable. "Here we go," Garrett muttered, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to make their final, desperate push into the compound. Amelia braced herself, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and fears as they hurtled towards a battle that would determine the fate of their last chance at survival. The story grips the reader from the very first sentence, plunging them directly into the heart of the action and chaos. The relentless pace, cinematic descriptions, and high-stakes tension create a vivid, immersive experience that is perfectly suited for AI voice narration. By withholding any explanatory details or context, the narrative maintains a sense of urgent mystery, leaving the audience craving more. The ominous, unpredictable nature of the mutated creatures, and the shocking revelation of the compromised safe haven set the stage for a gripping, evolving nightmare. This first part masterfully establishes the high-stakes, life-or-death stakes that will drive the remainder of the story. The Humvee smashed through the breach in the compound's walls, sending debris and shattered concrete flying in all directions. Amelia braced herself as the vehicle careened to a stop, her heart pounding in her chest. Garrett wasted no time, yanking the door open and shouldering his rifle. "Out now!" he barked, his eyes scanning the chaos that surrounded them. Amelia scrambled out, her gaze darting frantically as she tried to make sense of the scene unfolding before her. The once secure compound had been transformed into a nightmare, with the infected swarming in from every direction. "We need to reach the central command center," Garrett shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of screams and the sickening crunch of flesh. That's our only chance of regaining control and securing the perimeter. Amelia nodded, her mind racing as she followed Garrett, weaving between the shambling, mutated forms of the infected. The creatures were unlike anything she had seen before, their bodies twisted and distorted, their movements unnaturally fluid and eerily coordinated. As they pushed deeper into the compound, Amelia caught glimpses of the survivors who had already fallen, their bodies ravaged by the relentless onslaught. The sight filled her with a sickening dread, and she knew that they were running out of time. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the ground, and Amelia felt the shockwave slam into her, knocking her off her feet. Disoriented, she struggled to regain her footing, her vision blurred by the smoke and debris. Garrett was at her side in an instant, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tense and urgent. Amelia nodded, her throat tight with fear. "What happened?" she managed to gasp. Garrett's expression darkened. "The infected have adapted," he said grimly. "They're using the compound's own defenses against us." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the full implications of Garrett's words. The infected were not only relentless in their pursuit, but they were also becoming increasingly sophisticated, using the very tools and systems designed to protect the compound against the survivors. "We have to keep moving," Garrett said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The Central Command Center is our only hope." Amelia steeled herself, her resolve hardening in the face of the unimaginable horror that surrounded them. She knew that the battle ahead would be fierce, that they would be facing an enemy that was as relentless as it was unpredictable. But she also knew that they had no choice. It was a fight for survival, a desperate last stand against the tide of the undead that threatened to engulf them. And she was determined to do whatever it took to make it to the safety of the command center, no matter the cost. As they pressed forward, Amelia could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her, the knowledge that their last hope for salvation hung in the balance. But she refused to give in to the despair, her eyes narrowed with determination as she followed Garrett, her heart pounding with a fierce resolve to survive. The story deepens the sense of dire peril and overwhelming odds faced by the survivors as they find their last refuge breached and overrun by the mutating, adaptive horde of infected. The introduction of the infected using the compound's own defenses against the survivors raises the stakes even further, making their situation seem increasingly hopeless. Amelia's determination and resolve in the face of this escalating nightmare provides an emotional anchor, while Garrett's pragmatic urgency drives the relentless forward momentum of the narrative. The cliffhanger ending, with the survivors pressed to reach the Central Command Center as their last hope, leaves the reader desperate to know what happens next. Amelia and Garrett pressed forward, their lungs burning as they navigated the chaos of the Overrun compound. The infected were everywhere, their twisted, mutated forms shambling towards them from all sides. Garrett's rifle barked, the sharp cracks echoing through the air as he took down one infected after another. But Amelia could see the growing desperation in his eyes. They were running low on ammunition, and the horde seemed to be growing with every passing moment. "We've got to make it to the command center," Garrett shouted, his voice strained. "If we can regain control of the compound's defenses, we might have a chance." Amelia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that their survival now hinged on reaching that command center, but the path was treacherous, littered with the bodies of those who had already fallen. As they pressed forward, Amelia caught glimpses of the horrors that had unfolded within the compound. Survivors, once safe behind the fortified walls, had been torn apart by the relentless onslaught of the infected. The mutated creatures had somehow breached the compound's defenses, and now they roamed freely, their hunger insatiable. Amelia's stomach churned as she saw the bodies of children, their faces frozen in terror. She knew that they had to succeed, that the lives of countless others depended on their ability to regain control of the compound. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the ground, and Amelia felt the impact slam into her, knocking her to her knees. Dazed, she looked up to see a towering infected lumbering towards her, its gaping maw dripping with viscous, black fluid. Garrett was at her side in an instant, his rifle barking as he unleashed a hail of bullets into the creature. But the infected seemed impervious to the assault, its movements fluid and unnatural as it closed in on them. Amelia scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. They had to find a way to stop this relentless onslaught, to turn the tables on the infected and reclaim the compound. But how? As the infected drew closer, Amelia's gaze fell upon a nearby control panel, its lights blinking ominously. An idea began to form in her mind, a desperate gamble that might just be their last hope. "Garrett," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I have a plan." Garrett's eyes narrowed as he listened to her hastily explained idea, his expression a mix of skepticism and determination. "It's risky," he growled, "but at this point, we don't have any other choice." Amelia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that the stakes had never been higher, that the fate of the compound, and their own survival, hung in the balance. With a deep breath, she steeled herself for the perilous task ahead, her eyes narrowing with a fierce resolve that refused to be extinguished, no matter the cost. The story continues to ratchet up the tension and stakes, as Amelia and Garrett find themselves desperately pushing towards the central command center while fending off the relentless infected horde. The introduction of the mutated, seemingly unstoppable infected creature raises the sense of dread and hopelessness, while Amelia's hastily conceived plan provides a glimmer of hope, but also an ominous sense of risk and uncertainty. The vivid, cinematic descriptions of the carnage and the imminent threat create a tangible, gripping sense of the survivor's peril. The cliffhanger ending, with Amelia proposing a risky plan that may be their last chance, leaves the reader eager to discover what bold, desperate gambit the characters will attempt next. Amelia's heart pounded as she and Garrett sprinted towards the control panel, the hulking infected creature lumbering close behind them. She knew their plan was a desperate gamble, but they had no other choice. "Get ready," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the ear-splitting roar of the infected. Reaching the control panel, she began frantically typing commands, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Garrett stood beside her, his rifle at the ready, his eyes narrowed in concentration. The infected creature was closing in, its twisted, mutated form towering over them, and Amelia felt a chill of dread run down her spine. Suddenly, a series of sharp, metallic clangs echoed through the compound, and a series of heavy steel barriers began to descend, sealing off the various entrances and exits. Amelia watched as the infected creature slammed against the barrier, its guttural snarls of rage echoing through the air. "It's working," Garrett exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But we'd got to move fast. The compound's defenses won't hold them off forever." Amelia nodded, her mind racing as she followed Garrett towards the central command center. The compound's corridors were eerily silent, the only sounds the distant howls of the trapped infected and the pounding of their own footsteps. As they approached the command center, Amelia felt a surge of hope. If they could regain control of the compound's systems, they might just have a chance of turning the tide against the infected horde. Garrett paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Be ready," he whispered, his voice tense. "We don't know what we'll find in there." Amelia took a deep breath, her grip tightening on the pistol at her side. She knew that the battle ahead would be fierce, that they would be facing an enemy that had already proven its ability to adapt and overcome even the most formidable defenses. With a nod, Garrett pushed the door open, and they stepped into the command center. The room was in chaos, with screens flickering and alarms blaring. But Amelia's attention was drawn to the figure standing at the central console, his back turned to them. "Who's there?" the man called out, his voice laced with a mixture of fear and determination. Garrett stepped forward, his rifle raised. "I'm Garrett, and this is Amelia. We're here to reclaim the compound and stop the infected. The man turned, and Amelia felt a surge of relief as she recognized him. It was Colonel Alastair, the military commander who had once overseen the compound's defenses. "Thank God you're here," Alastair said, his eyes narrowing. "We've been fighting a losing battle. The infected have somehow breached our systems, and they're using our own defenses against us." Amelia's heart sank as she realized the full implications of Alastair's words. If the infected had gained control of the compound's systems, then their chances of reclaiming the safe haven were even more dire than she had imagined. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. Alastair's expression darkened. "We need to regain control of the compound's main systems," he said, his gaze flickering to the flickering screens. "But the infected have locked us out, and they're adapting faster than we can respond." Amelia felt a knot of dread forming in the pit of her stomach. They had come so far, only to find themselves facing an enemy that seemed to be one step ahead of them at every turn. But as she looked into Alastair's determined eyes, she knew that they couldn't give up. The fate of the compound, and countless lives, hung in the balance, and they had to find a way to prevail. Squaring her shoulders, Amelia stepped forward, her own resolve hardening. "Then we'll have to find a way to outsmart them," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "We'll do whatever it takes to reclaim this compound and stop the infected horde." The story continues to escalate the stakes and tension, as Amelia and Garrett's desperate gambit to seal off the infected using the compound's own defenses pays off, but only temporarily. The discovery that the infected has somehow gained control of the compound's systems raises the stakes even further, as the survivors realize that their last refuge is now under the control of their deadly adversaries. The introduction of Colonel Alastair, a respected military commander who has been fighting a losing battle, provides a glimmer of hope, but also underscores the seemingly insurmountable challenge they face. Amelia's steely determination in the face of this daunting situation creates a compelling emotional anchor, setting the stage for a climactic showdown as the survivors attempt to regain control of the compound and its systems from the relentless, adaptive infected horde. Amelia and Garrett stood beside Colonel Alastair, their eyes fixed on the flickering screens that displayed the status of the compound's defenses. The once formidable security systems had been compromised, their safeguards now turned against the survivors. "The infected have routed our main systems through a hidden network access point," Alastair explained, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're able to override our commands and take control of the compound's defenses." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the full extent of the infected's infiltration. If they couldn't find a way to regain control, the compound would become a death trap, trapping the survivors within its walls. "There must be a way to shut them out," Garrett said, his voice tense. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to break through." Alastair nodded, his expression grim. "We've been trying, but the infected are adapting faster than we can respond. They're using our own countermeasures against us, and every time we think we've found a weakness, they find a way to exploit it." Amelia's mind raced as she considered their options. They were running out of time, and the infected horde was only growing stronger with each passing moment. She knew they had to act, but the stakes were higher than ever. Suddenly, a series of alerts began blaring, and the screens flashed with images of the infected swarming towards the command center. "They've breached the containment barriers," Alastair shouted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We have to seal off this room now." Garrett reacted instantly, his rifle barking as he gunned down the first wave of infected that came charging through the doorway. Amelia joined him, her pistol spitting rounds with deadly precision. But the infected were relentless, their numbers swelling with each passing moment. Amelia could feel the panic rising within her as she realized that their last stand was rapidly becoming a losing battle. Alastair's voice cut through the chaos. "I've got an idea, but it's risky. We need to overload the compound's main power grid and trigger a system-wide reset. It might give us a chance to regain control before the infected can adapt. Amelia's eyes widened as she understood the implications of Alistair's plan. But won't that leave us vulnerable? She shouted, her voice barely audible over the din of the fighting. Alistair's expression was grim. It's a risk we have to take, he replied. If we don't stop the infected now, we'll all be trapped in here forever. Amelia glanced at Garrett, and she could see the same mixture of determination and fear in his eyes. They both knew that Alistair's plan was their last, desperate hope, but the consequences of failure were unimaginable. With a nod, Amelia turned her attention back to the infected, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Do it," she said, her voice laced with resolve. "We're running out of time." Alistair's fingers flew across the keyboard, and Amelia felt the ground shudder beneath her feet as the compound's power grid began to overload. The room was plunged into darkness, and the infected's eerie howls echoed through the corridors, a chilling harbinger of the chaos to come. Amelia braced herself, her heart pounding in her chest. They had taken a desperate gamble, and now their fate hung in the balance. The story escalates the stakes even further as the survivors realize that the infected have somehow gained control of the compound's vital systems, turning the very defenses meant to protect them against the survivors. The introduction of Alistair's risky plan to overload the power grid and trigger a system-wide reset creates a high-stakes dilemma, as the characters must weigh the potential benefits against the significant risks. The vivid, cinematic description of the infected swarming towards the command center, combined with the stark imagery of the room plunging into darkness, heightens the sense of peril and desperation. The cliffhanger ending, with the survivors poised to enact Alistair's gambit, leaves the reader on the edge of their seat, eager to discover whether this bold, last-ditch effort will succeed or further seal the character's doom. The compound was plunged into darkness as the power grid overloaded, leaving Amelia, Garrett, and Alistair to confront the infected horde in the eerie, flickering shadows. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she heard the snarls and howls of the mutated creatures drawing closer. She could feel the weight of the pistol in her hand, her finger poised on the trigger, ready to defend their last stand. Beside her, Garrett's rifle barked, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the chaos as he gunned down the infected that surged through the doorway. Alistair was at the console, his fingers flying as he worked to initiate the system-wide reset. Come on, Alistair muttered, his voice tense. "We need to buy a little more time." Amelia knew that time was running out. The infected were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless as they poured into the command center. She could feel the desperation rising within her, the knowledge that their plan might not be enough to save them. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the room, and Amelia felt the concussive force slam into her, knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, her pistol clattering from her grasp. Dazed, she looked up to see a massive, mutated infected towering over her, its jaws gaping wide. She froze, her mind racing, her body paralyzed with fear. But just as the creature lunged, a blur of motion flashed before her eyes, and Garrett was there, his rifle raised. He unleashed a hail of bullets into the infected, his face a mask of grim determination. The creature staggered, its monstrous form collapsing to the ground just inches from Amelia. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding, as Garrett pulled her to safety. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Amelia nodded, her throat tight. I think so," she managed to gasp. Alistair's voice cut through the chaos. "I've got it. The system reset is initiating." As the words left his lips, a shudder ran through the compound, and the lights flickered back to life. Amelia felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that the infected were still swarming, their focus unwavering. "It's not enough," Alistair said, his face etched with worry. "The reset is only buying us a little time. We need to find a way to permanently lock them out of the system." Amelia's mind raced, her gaze darting around the command center. She knew that they were running out of options, that the infected were closing in with each passing moment. Then, an idea struck her. "The armory," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we can activate the compound's defense systems, we might have a chance." Garrett's eyes widened, and he nodded, understanding dawning on his face. "It's our only shot," he said, his grip tightening on his rifle. Alistair hesitated for a moment, then straightened, his expression resolute. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady. "We've got to try." Amelia felt a renewed sense of determination as she followed Garrett and Alistair towards the armory, the infected horde hot on their heels. They were running out of time, but she knew that they had to take this final, desperate gamble. The fate of the compound, and their own survival, hung in the balance. The tension and peril escalate dramatically in this part, as the survivors are forced to confront the relentless infected horde in the darkness, with only Alistair's risky power grid overload as a temporary respite. The vivid, cinematic descriptions of Amelia's near miss with a towering mutated infected, and Garrett's heroic intervention create a gripping, heart-pounding sequence that heightens the sense of danger. The introduction of Amelia's idea to activate the compound's defense systems provides a glimmer of hope, but also underscores the dwindling options and the high stakes, all-or-nothing nature of their final gambit. The cliffhanger ending, with the survivors racing towards the armory while the infected horde closes in, leaves the reader desperate to know whether this last-ditch effort will succeed or doom the characters to a tragic fate. Amelia, Garrett, and Alistair sprinted through the corridors of the compound, their footsteps echoing against the walls as they raced towards the armory. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and Amelia could hear the eerie howls of the infected horde closing in behind them. "We need to move faster," Alistair shouted, his voice strained. "They're gaining on us." Garrett nodded, his rifle at the ready as he led the way, his eyes darting from one shadowy corner to the next. Amelia followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with the desperate hope that their plan would work. As they reached the armory, Alistair wasted no time, his fingers flying across the console as he worked to activate the compound's defense systems. Amelia and Garrett took up positions at the entrance, their weapons trained on the darkened hallway. The infected were closing in, their twisted, mutated forms emerging from the shadows, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the corridors. Amelia felt a chill of dread run down her spine as she realized just how close they were to being overwhelmed. Come on," Alistair muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, a series of loud clicks echoed through the armory, and Amelia felt a surge of hope as she saw the heavy steel shutters begin to descend, sealing off the entry points. But just as the shutters were about to close, a massive, mutated infected creature launched itself through the narrowing gap, its jaws gaping wide. Amelia and Garrett unleashed a hail of bullets, their weapons roaring to life, but the creature seemed unfazed, its momentum carrying it forward. Amelia watched in horror as the infected creature collided with the shutters, its massive form wedging them open. The compound shook with the impact, and Amelia felt her heart skip a beat as she realized that their plan was unraveling. Alistair's voice cut through the chaos. "The defense systems are online, but we need to buy more time to get them fully activated." Garrett turned to Amelia, his eyes narrowed with determination. "I'll hold them off," he said, his voice steady. "You and Alistair get to the console and finish the job." Amelia hesitated, her gaze flickering between Garrett and the infected creature that was now tearing its way through the armory. "But Garrett, you want." "I know," he interrupted, his expression grim. "Just go, Amelia. This is our only chance." Amelia felt a lump in her throat as she nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She knew that Garrett was sacrificing himself to give them the time they needed, and the weight of that realization threatened to crush her. With a deep breath, she turned and raced towards the console, Alistair at her side. As they worked frantically to activate the compound's defenses, Amelia couldn't help but glance back, her heart breaking as she watched Garrett stand his ground, his rifle blazing, against the relentless onslaught of the infected. The roar of the defense systems echoed through the armory, and Amelia felt a glimmer of hope. But as she looked back once more, she saw Garrett's form disappear beneath the crushing weight of the mutated creatures, their snarls and howls a chilling requiem to his final, heroic stand. Amelia's eyes burned with tears, but she knew that she had to press on. Garrett had given his life to save them, and she would honor his sacrifice by doing whatever it took to secure the compound and stop the infected horde, no matter the cost. With a renewed sense of determination, she turned back to the console, her fingers flying as she worked to complete the activation of the compound's defenses. The fate of the survivors and the last hope for humanity now rested on her shoulders. The story reaches a gut-wrenching emotional climax as Amelia and the others make a desperate push to activate the compound's defense systems, with Garrett sacrificing himself to buy them the time they need. The vivid, cinematic descriptions of the infected creature forcing its way into the armory, and Garrett's heroic final stand create a powerful, tragic moment that will leave readers deeply affected. Amelia's heartbreak and determination in the face of this loss adds a profound emotional resonance to the narrative, elevating the stakes and the personal stakes for the characters. The cliffhanger ending, with Amelia racing to complete the activation of the compound's defenses while the survivors' last hope hangs in the balance, sets the stage for a dramatic, high-stakes conclusion. Amelia's fingers flew across the console, her heart pounding as she worked to complete the activation of the compound's defense systems. The roar of the infected horde echoed through the armory, a chilling backdrop to her frantic efforts. Beside her, Alistair's face was etched with grim determination, his eyes narrowed as he provided support and guidance. Amelia knew that the fate of the survivors, and perhaps the last hope for humanity, rested on their ability to succeed. The compound shuddered as the defense systems roared to life, and Amelia felt a surge of hope. But that hope quickly turned to dread as she glimpsed the twisted, mutated forms of the infected surging towards them, their hunger undiminished. "We've got to hold them off," Alistair shouted, his voice strained. "The system needs a few more minutes to fully activate." Amelia nodded, her grip tightening on her pistol as she took up a defensive position alongside Alistair. The infected were relentless, their numbers swelling with each passing moment, and Amelia knew that they were perilously close to being overwhelmed. Alistair's rifle barked, his shots finding their mark with deadly precision, but the infected kept coming, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the armory. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine as she recognized the familiar forms of survivors who had fallen, their bodies now twisted and corrupted by the infection. "We can't hold them off much longer," Alistair said, his voice tinged with desperation. "The systems are almost ready, but I don't know if we'll." His words were cut off by a deafening explosion, and Amelia felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. She whirled around, her heart pounding, to see a massive, mutated creature, larger and more horrific than anything they had encountered before, smashing its way through the armory's defenses. Alistair's face went pale, and Amelia knew in that moment that their last stand was about to come to a brutal, inevitable end. But just as the creature lunged, the compound's defense systems roared to life, a blinding array of lights and the thunderous boom of automated turrets. The mutated creature recoiled, its inhuman cries echoing through the armory as it was bombarded by a relentless barrage of firepower. Amelia watched in awe as the compound's defenses tore through the infected horde, their once formidable bodies torn apart by the devastating onslaught. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burnt flesh and the shrieks of the dying, and Amelia felt a surge of both relief and revulsion. As the last of the infected fell, a deathly silence settled over the armory. Amelia and Alistair stood, their weapons still raised, their eyes scanning the carnage that surrounded them. "We did it," Alistair whispered, his voice barely audible. We actually did it. Amelia felt a lump in her throat as she remembered Garrett's sacrifice, the weight of his loss heavy in her heart. But she also felt a profound sense of relief, a glimmer of hope that perhaps they had not only saved themselves, but also the last remnants of humanity. As they stepped out of the armory and gazed upon the once secure compound, now transformed into a battlefield, Amelia knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous. The infected had proven to be a relentless, adaptable foe, and the scars of this battle would linger. But for now, in this moment of hard-won victory, Amelia allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had survived the onslaught, and they would use this hard-won respite to regroup, to rebuild, and to prepare for the battles to come. The story reaches a dramatic, adrenaline-fueled climax as Amelia and Alistair make a desperate last stand to activate the compound's defense systems, with the fate of the survivors hanging in the balance. The vivid, cinematic descriptions of the mutated, towering infected creature's assault on the armory create a visceral, heart-pounding sequence that leaves the reader on the edge of their seat. The activation of the compound's defenses and the subsequent decimation of the infected horde provide a cathartic, hard-won victory, but one that is tempered by the tragic loss of Garrett. Amelia's bittersweet mix of relief and grief creates a powerful emotional resonance, grounding the triumphant conclusion in a deeper sense of loss and the understanding that the battle is far from over. The final image of the survivors emerging from the armory, surveying the devastated compound, sets the stage for a future filled with the arduous work of rebuilding and preparing for the next phase of the struggle against the relentless infected horde. This 8-part story arc delivers a cinematic, high-stakes zombie survival narrative that is perfectly suited for immersive AI voice narration, with a gripping, unpredictable plot, vivid world building, and compelling character arcs.